Today we are going to be talking about pathogens. And a pathogen, by the simplest definition, is anything that can cause an infectious disease. So unfortunately for humans, what we're talking about are usually things that are going to make you feel sick, right? It's any kind of thing that can get into your body that's going to cause a disruption in your normal body function. And usually when there's a disruption in your normal body function, that's going to cause you to not feel so great, right? Because your body's responding to this foreign invader and the processes that it has to go through, whether it's the inflammatory response or whatever it is, the presence of that foreign body is going to cause your body to react in a way that's not going to make you feel good. So that's what pathogens do. They cause some type of infectious disease. And there's a lot of different ways and there's a lot of different types of pathogens which we'll get into. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the theory behind this, and that is the germ theory of disease. The germ theory of disease basically hypothesized that microorganisms can cause infections, right? Because there was obviously a time in history where we didn't know about microorganisms. We couldn't see them with microscopes and things of that. So this was a theory. We just said something is making this person react this way, and I think it's something that we cannot see. So infectious diseases can be brought on by a lot of different pathogens. Pathogens can take a lot of different forms. They can be caused by viruses, which are always tricky because viruses are not alive. And so dealing with them is really tough. We're essentially, with a virus, we're relying on the body's defense system to take care of it for us because we can't introduce an antibiotic or antifungal or something like that. So the pathogens can be a virus. They can be a bacteria. They can be a fungi, they can be a protist, or we even would throw parasitic worms into this group because they're capable of causing infectious disease. So before we jump into all the different types of pathogens and how they make us sick, let's take a look at some of the history behind it. We're going to look at Koch's postulates. So Koch's postulates are a list that a scientist by the name of Koch developed to help in deciding which pathogen causes a specific disease. And so from these postulates, he came up with 4 postulates, which we're going to look at. So the first one says the pathogen must always be found in the body of the sick organisms and cannot be found in the body of healthy organisms. So if you're looking for a pathogen, if it's causing this disease, then we're not going to find it in healthy individuals. So that's his first postulate. The second one says that the pathogen must be isolated from the sick organism and grown in the lab. So we find an individual that's sick, we isolate that pathogen, and we remove it, and we grow it in the lab. When it's grown in the lab, this is the third postulate, when it is grown in the lab, it is then given to a healthy organism, and that organism then develops the same disease that the person that we removed it from. And then the last postulate, it has to be isolated from that second organism. The pathogen must be exactly the same as the original pathogen. So we're going to examine it. And this is the system we still use today. Okay, this is how we identify pathogens, and we know that they're, what we say they are, because we find it in an organism, we remove it, we grow it in a lab. It infects another organism and makes them sick. And then when we isolate it and we look at this sample and this sample, we say, yep, it's the exact same thing. And really, with all the understanding we have of medical science, we know, pretty early on when someone has an infection, we look at their symptoms and we say they're running a fever, they're having gastrointestinal problems, and we can isolate, and we have a pretty good idea. Before we even really run a lot of tests, the doctor can usually say, I think it's this, right? And then we're just really going for confirmation after that. So viruses, as we've already spoke to, they are non-living, and they can only replicate when they insert their genetic material into a host. So they have to be able to invade an organism, take over that host cell, and then make copies of themselves. So viral infections, things that we would consider to be viral pathogens, would be things like the common cold, influenza, or more commonly known as the flu, chickenpox, and warts. These are all caused by viruses. And we know, we're very familiar with the common cold and the flu. they can be treated, but they cannot be cured with antibiotics. When you go to a doctor and you have a viral infection, their most likely recommendation is going to be go home, get plenty of rest, and get plenty of fluids. And the reason for that is they're telling you that they need your body's immune system to fight this off. They need your body's immune system to form antibodies, which are going to start removing or blocking the virus from invading other cells, and eventually your body is just going to rid itself of this. Chickenpox is the same way. You essentially have to let this virus run its course. And then, of course, warts are going to be the same way. Sometimes they can be removed and things like that, but you really can't take a medicine and get rid of them. So all of these share that in common. They can't be cured with an antibiotic. They can't be cured with some type of over-the-counter medicine. Our body's going to have to take care of them. So the nice, I guess, thing about a virus is that once you have had a specific type of virus, more likely than not, you are not going to get that exact same virus again. Now, you may say, well, that's not true because I've had a cold like 3 different times this winter, okay? But you didn't have the exact same cold, right? A lot of these strains of the common cold will have the exact same symptoms, but they're not exactly the same. And the same thing can be said for the flu. You can have the flu multiple times, but if you are exposed to H1N7, and you get the flu, your body should form antibodies against that. So the next time you are exposed to that specific form of the flu, you will not get it. Okay? So that, again, the virus is going to have the good and the bad. The good is that you can't get it again, or you shouldn't get it again. The bad is you can't just take amoxicillin and be over it. Bacteria, they are the living single-celled organisms that break down the tissues of infected organisms for food, or they're going to release toxins that interfere with the normal activity of their host. These are the most common pathogen type. So bacteria are always trying to get into our bodies, right? Either through our skin, being breathed in through our nose, through our mouth. Our skin is a pretty good barrier. It's not going to let bacteria in. However, if we have a cut or an open wound, right? When we talk about wounds becoming infected, they're usually infected with bacteria. That bacteria is going to find a spot where there's a chink in the armor, and they are going to invade that area. So that's if a wound is not kept clean, then it can become infected, and that infection is a sign of it's usually a bacterial infection that's gotten in there and it's worked its way into your body. Examples of bacterial infections, some of the most common ones are going to be streptococcus infections, so strep throat, diphtheria, botulism, and anthrax. These are going to be the guys that we most commonly see. Botulism shows up a lot in food. We usually get botulism from food that's gone bad. So you have a potato salad, it's sitting out at a picnic in the sun. It shouldn't be, but it's because it's supposed to be refrigerated. A lot of times the bacteria can grow there, you consume it, and then it's inside your body. The good thing about bacterial infections is they can be treated with antibiotics, and it's usually a pretty short stint. Now, if they're allowed to go on without treatment, they can definitely create more problems. Fungi are another group that act as pathogens. Fungi are multicellular organisms that cause disease on the surface of the skin oftentimes, but we can also find them in the mouth, the throat, fingers, and toenails, right? So we can have fungus that grows in our toenails. Fungal, they like that environment. It's wet, it's moist, it's dark, right? So that's where fungi likes to thrive. Fungus can become a real problem when it spreads from your lungs to other organs, right? So if we inhale a fungus or a fungi of any kind and it gets into our lungs, then it can spread within the body. Fungal infections can become life-threatening pretty quickly if they're not treated. Other examples of fungal infections would include ringworm, which is, even though the name says worm, it is actually a fungal infection which will form a small circle on the surface of your skin, and also thrush, which causes your skin to be very red and have kind of a distinct pattern there. Protists can also be pathogens. These are single-celled eukaryotes that can infect people through contaminated water or even an insect bite. They take nutrients from their host, and they can cause damage to tissues and cells. This would include things like malaria, African sleeping sickness, and a lot of our intestinal diseases are caused by protists. So you drink some bad water, it's really going to infect your GI, your digestive tract, going to cause a lot of upset stomach and that sort of thing. Usually the cause of that is going to be a protist. And then parasitic worms are the last group of pathogens. These guys can enter the body in a number of different ways, through the mouth, the nose, the anus, or through the skin. They mostly live in the intestinal tract, so they can absorb nutrients there from the host. This is going to include things like trichinosis, hookworm, and even elephantitis. So there's lots of different pathogens that we can experience that can make us sick. The good news is most of them are very treatable, and the body will respond to that treatment, and then the pathogen will be removed and we can go back to living normal, healthy lives.